Hi, this is Tamika with Create a Generational Love Cycle. And today is January the 10th, 2022. We made it. We are here in another year. And as I've posted before on my social accounts, Twitter and Instagram, that to make last year a year that you've learned from, no regrets, you're alive. And as my mother would all often tell us, live another day. And when you live another day, as we grow, you learn from what you did and what you could have done better. But there are no regrets. Life is a journey. Life is about living, and we live to the best of our ability. And so for this year, I really want to focus on definitely the beginning of this year, focusing on remembering who we are. And that's one of the phrases that I've had at the bottom of my social media texts or um, the quotes that I'll put on social media is to remember who we are, that we are more again than our experiences. And I know one of the most critical elements, critical things for me growing up and knowing my story of experiencing childhood abuse, of being raised by a single parent, of not having my father and his family pretty much in our lives, is that my mother would often share her life principles. And it would take me a few years. I remember actually I was in our second home. We were in our second home, and I was in the dining room. And I believe I was standing up at the time or walking around. I often walk, because I've shared in my post, whether it's in house, out of house, wherever. Walking has been so instrumental in my journey, my life journey. And so I stood that day and I just had this overwhelming feeling of joy, of happiness, believing that God gave our mother for a reason, that she felt the need to share her lessons to help us to not make those mistakes, the same, I should say, errors that she made, or even just learning from her sisters and her brothers and what they did. And she would share that. She would share that she would watch them, observe them, and say, okay, I don't want to do that, especially if it ended up, her brothers and sisters getting a whooping or something. And so my mother, I just had so much joy that day of realizing, and it's not about comparison, but in looking at my aunts and my uncles and just who God chose for us to have as a parent, and to put on her heart, my mother, that the way you grew up does not have to be the way you have to continually be. You can actually change as a parent. You can change your legacy, your future. And so, create a generational love cycle is about taking what we've learned in life to help us to not only be better, but to also raise a more conscious generations to come, to leave a legacy from the inside out. That I've always been about quality versus quantity. What is the quality, the character, the integrity of you as a person, more, more at times, you guys, more than money, more than having a position. That I always looked at, what would the quality of my life, what am I risking? My peace of mind, my ability to choose for myself, the freedom to do as I please versus having some title. And so quality, and it goes to friendships, quality of friendships. It wasn't about the number of friends, but do we have something in common? Were we aligned in many ways than not? And so as we know ourselves, as we know who we are and the legacy that we want to leave, we begin to unwind our past, not in regret again, but as learning and growing and becoming more conscious. And so I've shared on several occasions that after my experience with childhood abuse, that I wanted to be more aware, more conscious, because I was trying to figure out, how did I end up in that situation? How did I end up in that experience? And it was not about blaming myself. It was about, how can I be more conscious about life and paying attention? And that led to being a student of my abuse, being a student of life, learning from the errors of what I did, my life, and learning from the errors of others. I said, even that day, I remember standing outside our front yard in our first home. And I said, I want to learn from my errors, but more importantly, I want to learn from others, right? So you don't repeat the same errors. And it was along that, after the abuse, that I said, I'm going to I don't like the way mistakes sound, that I replace that day the word mistakes with life lessons. And how eventual the evolution of my mind, of my spiritual growth, said, you know what, life is about living and learning from our experiences. And I didn't want regrets. Now, there are things that for a long time I wish that was there some way, I was thinking, was there some way I could undo the abuse? But there was no way to undo it. What was done, what was done. What was done was done. And so, one of the things, as I've shared in the beginning of this podcast, is that I had our mother. I had family. I focused on what I had. And I had a mother that I even after the abuse, we became closer and spending more time with one another. And me just listening and observing her life and listening to what she said, that if it resonated with me, if I felt it was true within me, then I uh, uh, adapted that way of life, that thinking, to my foundation, to my inner garden. I allowed those seeds to be sown in my inner garden. And I have a list of things that my mother would tell us, give from the heart. You don't have to do anything to anybody, that God will take care of people. People have a tongue and they will talk. Don't talk me to death. She would say that. She was more about doing. And she would say, don't wait. Don't put off tomorrow what you can do today. And you've heard that. Keep on trucking, meaning keep on moving in the right direction. Be grateful, be bold, live another day, take care of home first, make no excuses, move beyond I'm sorry. And that's one of the memoirs that I'm working on, is those lessons that I learned from my mother, and how I use those throughout my life, and most importantly, parenting, because the violence, the a lot of hatred, resentment, bitterness, vengeance, that's real. It's real out there in the world, enough that I feel that I need principles to help teach our children. And at some point, I read the Bible when I was 10 years old, approximately 10 years old, from cover to the end of the Bible. And I know those seeds were sown in me, but it would take years for me to realize that a lot of what my mother taught us was from the Bible. I learned that her grandfather was actually a pastor of the church, and she would often go to church and listen to him. And so, one of the main things that was kind of hard in the beginning, you guys, was the principle my mom would say, give from the heart. That often she was so nice to people, including family members, that often looked down on us and, teased us, talked about us, the shack we lived in, and how we didn't have what they had. But my mother, by the grace of God, she had things. By the grace of God, we had things. We never went without. And things happened in our life. that we had enough to share what we had. And my mother would not, she wouldn't hesitate to share a hoe, a garden tool, a hoe, a rake. There were a time when we had like two or three of them. We would buy stuff from a lot of the garage sales and markets. My mom hammers and just all kind of household items, and so we would have those around. Granted, there was a time in our life, I remember, hitting a nail with the back of the heel of a shoe, or using a butter knife as a screwdriver. But we had stuff, and my mother and I would just look at her, and I'd be like, why are you, thinking to myself, why are you letting them borrow stuff, and they're not nice to us. And so one day, I think my mom sensed my attitude of going to, she wanted me to go take, I think it was a hoe over to our grandmother's house. And I think she sensed that I had an attitude. And I did ask her, I don't know if it was that day, but I did ask her, why are you so nice to people that are not nice to you? And she said, you give from the heart and you expect nothing in return. That God looks at our heart. And so it would take some time for that to really sink in me, that God looks at our heart. And that was around the time where I really reached out to nature, and I out of whatever that was going on inside of me at the time, I needed something that knew more than me. I needed something that was wise, something that would help me not become or do the things that was done to me. The things that really hurt, that brought anger, that even vengeance, even resentment, that I didn't want to be that type of person. I used my emotions to say, this is not how I want to be treated, and this is not how I want to treat others, and no one deserves to feel that way. So anger and resentment were great teachers for me, because I was like, I don't want to feel that way. Even as I am now, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be resentful. And so as I developed my relationship with what I learned to call God, and I still do today, higher power, infinite intelligence. I know there are many words that are used, but it was never about the words. It was about a relationship with something that was good in life, something that was resilient, something that knew all that would happen. And I wanted to be on that side. And so I knew that even though it took a while, that I needed to get my heart right. And that meant forgiving. That meant facing my emotions head on. If I was angry, I was angry. I tried not to hide it. And I eventually I really had to take a look at all of those emotions at another point in my life. But the biggest thing I learned is that I learned, because I still live close to those that abuse me, I learned to give from the heart, to celebrate um, birthdays and weddings and graduations, and new jobs and off the street, whatever was going on. I learned to celebrate laughter, to celebrate family, keeping a reasonable distance. And I also learned to grieve, to mourn when other family members were mourning. Because this whole thing about giving from the heart, and God sees our heart. And there are many verses that tell us that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, that bitterness and envy and jealousy all find a way of getting out. I know I continue to deal with my experiences as you do. that, jealousy and envy and anger and undealt emotions all have a way of coming out and showing us where we need to grow, where we need to evolve as a spiritual being. And so, parenting and leaving a legacy, creating a generational love cycle, is all about giving from the heart because you allow your experiences to make you better instead of bitter. That you say to yourself that I don't want anybody to experience what I experienced. My children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, no one. And so you look for ways to share love, to create love, to express love to those we love, those that we have been given to be in charge of, to guide, to direct, you know, that our children are spiritual beings just like us, dressed in a costume, dressed in their colors and their personalities and their shapes and their eyes and their hair and their nose, that they too are here to evolve just like us. God tells us to forgive so that we are forgiven. He says he does not condemn us. So my thing is, why should I condemn others? Excuse me. Why should we condemn others when God has not condemned us? And so when we give from the heart, we are all about purifying our heart, digging up those weeds of doubt, of anger and fear and jealousy and resentment from our experiences. We are being mindful of what we watch and what we talk about, what we think about. That anytime we're thinking about our experiences, we think about learning. As I mentioned earlier, instead of regretting, what can I learn from that? What conviction birthed from that experience? And how can I apply it to my life and to the life of others? And so that is the very first principle that I discuss in my memoir, because I think that it's, if you will, at the heart of everything we do. The heart is the center of our garden, the lungs, the tree that stands in our garden. And that whatever we allow in there, the seeds that we plant, allow planted by others, will eventually bring fruit, bring a harvest. And so, as you take this time, I know the coronavirus, the numbers are going up in different cities and states. As you have more time on your hand, assess your garden, assess your heart. And are you, the things that you do, are you giving from your heart? Are you giving from bitterness and weeds within your heart? This is Tamika Chambers with Create a Generational Love Cycle. And as we move forward this year, I really want to bring a lot of the principles that I feel have helped me. And along with those are the Bible verses that have helped. Again, I'm not about religion. It's more about a spiritual evolution and revolution. That in order to regenerate this world, to help people remember who they are, everything starts with one person from the inside out. You have what it takes to create a generational love cycle.